a future post-COVID-19, which that was a very engaging and interesting conversation. And you can also catch up with that conversation in case you missed it. Rewatch it on Owando's YouTube channel. It is very, very interesting, and I'm sure you won't want to miss out on that. This session is also going to be streamed on YouTube. So for those of you who want to catch up with that later, you can do that. But to introduce myself officially, I'm Folu Storms, and I will be your moderator for this session. Now, how is this going to work? I'll give you the background. Today, we're going to have a series of conversations with millennials who are all currently navigating different sectors relating to governance and policy. We'll be taking a closer look at the economy and how it impacts us. We'll be examining the reality of the skills gap that does exist and is evident in a lot of millennials. And of course, the future of work and the role that technology plays in all of this. So it'd be quite a comprehensive conversation, but it's not just one conversation, as I mentioned at the beginning, it is a series of conversations with different individuals. Now, the thing is, it's not enough to say that millennials should be included in conversations. We hear this all the time, include young people, include millennials. Millennials across the continent themselves must actually step up and start taking real action. That is important. We've got to ask the hard questions and, understand how our nations work. Because we're not paying attention to the rules, to the policies, to how things currently work. How do we expect to impact or change that? Now, the change that we want to see, really and truly, it can only really begin with us, which is why this conversation is titled Change Starts With Us. It is born of our own actions, and it will change the future of how things are. If we keep saying that previous generations have made things difficult for us, using Nigeria as a case and study, if we keep talking about how leaders are failing us, the question is, what are we doing to make sure that we become better leaders for today and tomorrow and to impact the future generations? Again, the change, it truly does begin with us. Housekeeping, to let you know how these conversations will proceed. These conversations will go on from now. It is about 1:02 in sessions of up to 20 minutes each. So the sessions might be shorter than 20 minutes, but will definitely be no longer. So that means that by about 4 p.m. or just before, we will be done with all these conversations. Now, during these sessions, I'll take audience questions as well. So please do feel free to drop those questions for us in our chat room, just to make sure that you're fully engaged in the conversation and that our speakers are addressing questions and topics that you may have. Now, for Owando, conversations like these help in empowering current and future generations. They challenge us all to think and act differently and how to impact our future. And Owando has been involved in building capacity across the African continent for several years. It's not just in Nigeria that they're trying to make a difference. Now, this has happened through various platforms like the Owando Graduate Development Program, also called OGAP, that has the objective of improving Nigeria's oil and gas talent pipeline by training and developing young Nigerian graduates over a 12-month internship program. So that again is OGAP. If you don't know about it, please do go check that out for those of you who are just coming into the room and wondering. Owando Intern Search is another way that Owando has impacted the community. It's a digital competition that gives at least one young Nigerian the opportunity to experience working in a leading oil and gas company for 6 months. And offline, Owando has collaborated with communities, universities, tech hubs from the WF Global Shapers Africa to Kenya and Obafemi Awolowo universities. They're really quite present in what I consider the gestation period for change makers. Over 4,000 youth have benefited from skill acquisitions programs established by Owando and by her joint venture partners, NNPC and NAOC, within the various host communities. And that's a really important thing as well. And with all of that being said, we are just getting ready to launch into our first conversation in the series. It is with a very inspiring fellow. His name is Samson Itodo. He's the executive director of YAGA Africa and the convener of the Not Too Young to Run movement. He also was a Tutu Fellow. He was part of the Tutu Fellowship in 2019, has been a Future Africa Awards winner. I mean, he's such a phenomenal individual. So I would like to welcome into the room, Samson Itodo. Samson, can you join us now? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Folu. Good afternoon. And good afternoon
to everyone. Good afternoon. How are you doing today?
Very, very fine. It's a delight to be here.
Excellent. It's a delight to have you. So Samson, we've got really interesting conversation ahead of us. And we're going to be delving into the area, one of your areas of expertise, policy and governance when it deals with young people. So young people are getting more involved in politics at the moment, creating more awareness around pertinent issues. We're seeing a lot more drive by young people into digital campaigning, things like change.org. When there's an issue, people start putting up petitions and they're like, okay, protest, how do we protest? People are very vocal online, which I think is good that we're wanting to speak up on the issues, but a number of these digital activations or drives rarely ever translate into real change, or that is the general consensus sometimes from people out in the world. So where do you think young people should be channeling their efforts? And what do you think they should be doing differently to bring about real change and solutions?
Thanks. Just to thank Oando for hosting very, very important and strategic conversations about the future of Nigeria. It's good to see that a company is involved in this. I had interesting feedback when I posted this on social media, and I was going to talk about politics and governance. But to your question, I think that what are young people doing? First, we need to recognize that our society is going through different levels of transformation. And this transformation is informed by the agency that young people are beginning to exercise. So when young people are on social media platforms and they are venting, don't forget that democracy is actually about asking questions and it's about venting. So social media and technology has expanded the frontiers of political socialization. Previously, we only socialized in our schools with social studies, or even our families, or in fact, even to a large extent, our churches. But what you have seen is, as population increases, the frontiers of political socialization have also increased. And so young people are becoming more aware, citizens are becoming more aware. They're using technology and social media for holding governments to account. And that is unprecedented, and we have to celebrate that. For a lot of times, if you see issues relating to accountability, whether security agencies or rape or gender-based violence, or even exposing corruption, and that has come to the fore because young people are using these tools. Millennials are in a different society, a different context. And so we need to acknowledge that, yes, young people are doing lot of stuff, and they just need to build on that. So if you ask me what should young people do, I'll say do the things that we're doing more, but maybe we need to be a lot more strategic about it. That there has to be a convergence between digital activism as well as offline activism. I hear people say this, that, oh yes, it's good to be on Twitter, but how many people on Twitter have voters card when it comes to elections? And that's the biggest challenge, and that's something we need to preach. First, political participation is central to development. That young people need to recognize that they have there's an inherent responsibility on every young person to transform society. And one way to do that is to participate in the way your society is governed. Elections provide you an opportunity to make your voice heard. When you don't register to vote, or when you register to vote and you collect your PVC and don't show up to vote, what you do is you let other people actually decide how leaders are recruited and how your society is governed. So sometimes we lose our voice because we don't participate in voting. We have 84 million registered voters in Nigeria. Follow, 51% of those registered voters are young people between 18 and 35. In 2019 elections, how many people showed up? We had about 34% turnout for the presidential elections. And out of these 34%, 46.1% of these 36% were young people. So if only 29 million people came out to vote for presidential elections, and we have over 51% youth on the voters register, we don't have any rights to complain. So it's important that we translate or transit from just social media activism to using those tools to educate other people and mobilize them to cast their vote at elections. It's very, very important. and also running for office as well.
So Samson, let me jump in there. First of all, welcome to everyone who's just joining us. This is a Millennial Conversation. I'm hosted by Oando. I'm the moderator. I'm Folu. And we are going to continue having these conversations. So do make sure you share the link with everyone. And also while you're having a conversation on Twitter, do use the hashtag Millennial Conversation and hashtag Oando Web Series. All right, that would be fantastic. And you can follow, of course, the company as well on social media, Instagram and Twitter handles at Oando PLC, and LinkedIn and YouTube Oando PLC. And the website is www.oandoplc.com. Now, Samson Itodo is who we're talking to at the moment, and he's a phenomenal person involved very much in governance, change, and not too young to run movement, which is really important. Now, Samson, you've addressed the huge percentage that young people actually occupy in terms of registered voters, but declare what appears to be apathy. That's what I'm going to call it, in terms of young people coming out to exercise their civic duty or right to vote. Now, I remember doing a tour, going to different cities last year, again, to galvanize people to just get up and, see what they were doing. And it was with a couple of musicians. Emma Abaga was very instrumental in that. And some of the feedback that we got from young people, that I got personally, was, what's the point? Our vote is not going to count. It's not going to, they don't care about us. Why should I get up and waste my time? And we hear this sort of rhetoric quite often. So I wonder, how do we begin to get around that problem of apathy? Because it seems to be something very entrenched in the mindset of people, especially 30 and below. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
There's several reasons why young people are apathetic towards politics and governance. One, democracy has failed to deliver development to the people. And so people are questioning, what's the nexus between coming out, stand in the rain and in the sun to vote, and at the end of the day, you end up with insecurity, lack of jobs, poverty, and you can see the progressive deterioration of the state. And so citizens are just wondering, why should they actually come out to cast their vote? The second point is, politics in Nigeria has remained an old boys club. It's determined by the old boys. There are no new faces, no new voices. Women, young people are shut from participating. And if young people don't see their lights and they don't see their contemporaries in office doing excellent, so why should they participate? And the point that we need to make with respect to inertia or low turnout for elections is, until democracy starts delivering development to the people, we will continue to witness the decline in the turnout of voters for elections. But for young people, the more you stay out of voting, just know someone is actually voting for you. And that person may not have an altruistic agenda for development of your community. So you have to participate in the process, because politics is everything. Politics determines the food that you eat. Politics determines the clothes that you wear. Politics determines, to a large extent, even the air that you breathe, because someone is in charge of taking decisions around economy, around security, around infrastructure, around education. This person is elected. If you don't participate in deciding who becomes your leader, there's no way we're going to develop. And that's what young people need to understand. That is, these things are very, very connected. And when we participate, we've got the power to determine who leads us. And this needs to happen at the local government level, at the state level, and at the national level.
Okay, so the question, sorry to interject just there, how can we educate, empower, position ourselves as millennials? Even though some of us are in the elder millennial category, we're still inside. How do we then educate, empower, and position ourselves to attain these seats at the table, whether it's at a local government level, federal level, and is this even an ambition that can be realized in any reasonable percentage, bearing in mind that 60% of Nigeria's 190 million population is younger than 25? Is this a realistic ambition in the near future?
Well, for millennials, you need to understand that there's a do or die nature of our politics. And so these guys who are in office will continue to perpetuate themselves in office. So we need to keep that at the back of our minds. And what we need to do is, we're going to win this battle right? And I call this a battle because it's a struggle to reclaim the state, because the state has been captured. And one way to reclaim the state, one, is you don't reclaim the state, you don't participate, you don't shake the tables, you don't get access to the table just because you're young. No, you're going to gain access to the table because of the value that you bring to the table. So it's important that we build our knowledge first about our society. So one, get a copy of the Constitution. You need to know what the Constitution says. The Constitution is our governing document, is a legal and a political document that prescribes how the state is run. It talks about the functions of government. So if you have questions, you need to ask the legislature. You know their roles by looking at provisions in the Constitution. You also know your rights. Democracy is about rights. Chapter 2, Chapter 4 of the Constitution clearly articulates the rights that you have as a citizen. So know your right to enforce your right. That's one. Two, you need to get a copy of the Electoral Act. We need to be interested in election because that's the only leadership recruitment process we have in the country with respect to elective positions, right? So get a copy of the Electoral Act, participate in elections. The third point is join a political party. There are 18 registered political parties in Nigeria today. If no one aligns with your values and your ideology, please go and create one. You can establish one. It is easy to establish a political party in Nigeria. Check the Constitution and the Electoral Act and get forces that align with your ideology. The fourth one is about community development, and we taking responsibility at our community level. That when we talk about development and community organizing, your immediate community, you exist in that community to transform that society. So you can volunteer. You can volunteer to teach. You can volunteer to clean your environment. You can just volunteer to educate kids and teach them physics, or teach them how to become very useful to their society. And the fifth and the last point is about that unity and that consensus that our generation needs. We're grappling with a generational identity as millennials, and we need to have consensus on that generational identity and what is our struggle as a generation, and how are we going to do what to win that battle. And for me, the generational struggle that we have as millennials is reclaiming the state to the point where people who are in power use political power for our common good. But at the moment, we have political office holders who only think about themselves, their families, those who come from their tribes, and it's not about the common good. Until we get to that point, I don't know what we are going to bequeath to the Gen Zs who are already coming after us, because they are coming with a new culture, with a different orientation. Their grievance, their aspiration, their value systems are way different. So we've got to really think about, a political system, because I know we're going to talk about the economy, so I won't delve into that, but a political system that recognizes and puts people at the center of politics and governance.
Okay. All right. Samson, thank you. I mean, a couple of very important things. First of all, everyone listening, the Constitution. Do you know what the Constitution says? I think that's really important, because that is the policy document. That's the foundation on which our country is essentially laid. As you said, that states our rights, states how everything should function. And of course, the electoral process, make sure that you're involved in that as well. Now, Samson, you've clearly, your things you said have clearly sparked things off in other people's minds. I'm going to go into some of the conversations and questions that are coming through. We've got one person asking, saying, it would be great if we could privatize the voting process, make it a dual voting process, both online and offline, also involving electoral colleges. And that's something we've heard before. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we need to increase our use of technology for voting. There are conversations around electronic voting. It's very, very important. Managing the logistics of 84 million registered voters. It is very, very difficult to organize elections in Nigeria, to be honest. We have 120,000 polling units. We have about 54,000 voting points. Now, the materials are produced centrally. Okay. Now, each ballot paper and result sheets will have to be deployed to the states. And it needs to get to the state, it gets to the wards and then to the polling units. It's not easy managing elections. And that is why if we digitize our elections with safeguards to guarantee the sanctity and the transparency of the process, because electoral trust is not blind trust. When you automate your electoral process, people can no longer see what happens. And with the kind of our political culture, and I say you can deploy technology, you can deploy electronic voting.
Yeah.
If you don't change the political culture, the politicians you have today will look for ways to circumvent that process. And what we don't want, like Raila Odinga of Kenya would say, are computer-generated leaders. We want leaders who are voted by the people and electoral outcomes that are a reflection of people's vote. So it's good. The National Assembly is considering electoral amendments, and we all need to be part of it because we need to fix our elections. I support, electronic voting, but there has to be safeguards that ensures the transparency and openness of the process. But let's also keep in mind that the countries who produce these machines, they themselves don't use these machines for voting. And so there's a political economy around this discussion, and we can have further conversations on that.
Interesting, thank you. Okay, we've got more questions. Let's see. Babatunde asked this one. He says, thank you so far, Ms. Saitodo. Do you think that what Nigeria needs is a gradual integration of young people into power, gradual integration, which is what pertains now, or a massive push and introduction into power? Because the old boys have failed and are a bit too stubborn to vacate the seats. So young people are not necessarily patient enough, and that's what is making them lose faith in democracy, I think is what he's saying. So what do you think is a way forward on this is the question?
No, gradual, periodic, reformist, revolutionary approach, any approach that we can adopt, to get young people into office, it's important. But I want to underscore that the question of political inclusion isn't just about fulfilling a democratic ideal. That yes, if you have young people, if you have women in office, yes, representation is key, but that's not it. So if you get young people into office and so what? So it has to be young people who have competence, who have character, and who have capacity, because we want to disrupt this political system that has undermined and impeded on our growth and development. So it's not just having young people. So it's young people with these sort of competencies that we need. And let me say that, to be honest, we need a mixture of both the old and young in public office. That intergenerational dialogue needs to be strengthened, because there are older people who have experience, who still have capacities that we need. But both generations have to be on the table. And I say even Gen Zs also need to be in that room, because they are increasing in population. And if democracy is about the majority, then we have to really rethink our organizing strategy. This political mobilization strategy must have these different generations in one room. Young people are already taking leadership. In the State House of Assemblies, because of the Not Too Young to Run, we have 22 young people who are in the State House of Assemblies. We have about 13 of them who are in the Federal House of Representatives. But that has also sparked discussions within governors around appointing younger people. So we have in Kwara, we have a young lady who is 26, who was appointed a commissioner, at 26. That is unprecedented. But we've got to raise the bar. And I want to say that our negotiation for power is to use political power to lift people out of poverty. It's not to use political power because it is sexy and it's cool to have young people in office. Nigeria needs leaders that can transform our society, because I don't know how we ended up here. And one way to do that is to disrupt the political system and get more young people. I hate to hear people say young people are not experienced. Think about it. Assuming, just conceptualize that all those who are speaking on this platform today are ministers of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Just think about it, right? Because these are people who are doing excellent work in the private sector. They are young people in the public sector as well. So let's break down those walls. These gerontocrats that have continually perpetuated themselves in office. Let's disrupt it and get more young people and transform Nigeria, and let's reclaim that glory that we've always had.
I love that. Thank you very much, Samson. Stephanie comes in with a question very similar to even what I was thinking, because a few times you've mentioned taking control of that electoral process and trying to figure out how to change it in a way that makes sense for us going forward. Stephanie says, I think that unity is such an important point. We all share such different views and have no generational identity, Stephanie says. A lot of us have grown to think self first, and it seems like we may leave the system worse off than the people ahead of us. Again, a sentiment that is expressed often with people saying, these young people, they're worst. Young people have ruined it. And I find that a fascinating expression, considering that a lot of the change and a lot of the involvement in campaigning against institutionalized oppression of certain groups of people has been championed by young people. It's the Generation Z that are the Glasgow's generation that are not taking the rubbish. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this, though?
Well, to be honest,
generational identity.
Thank you very much. That's what I was just going into. You see, if you look through our evolution, the generation before our independence, and by the way, we'll be 60 in a couple of weeks, or in a couple of months, we'll be 60. Now, that generation's burden was to get and secure independence. The likes of Herbert Macaulay, J.C. Vaughan, Ernest Ikoli, that was their own burden. That was their generational burden. When they won that battle and we got independence, the military took over. Again, for that generation, their burden was to do what? Was to kick the military and push them back to the barracks. After they succeeded, the next generation was how to consolidate democracy, because we are still an evolving and emerging democracy. And we are the ones who have that responsibility. And I want those who think that, young people will do worse, please have a rethink. Because if you think young people will do worse, just look at the tech sector, look at the agricultural sector, look at the sports, look at entertainment, look at hospitality. Look at what young people are doing to transform our society. Just look at the COVID-19. Look at what LifeBank is doing. Look at what, I was in a webinar yesterday with the vice president, and he was mentioning LifeBank and was talking about, and there was this other company as well who is accelerating, supporting the NCDC and the government to accelerate testing. Those who lead these companies are young people. So when you say young people are going to do worse, I honestly, I beg to differ. Do we have mischief makers? Do we have young people with a very poor and low value system? Yes, we do have them. The hush puppies of this world and co, they give us a bad name, but that's not who we are. Because for every one young person you see who gives us a bad name, there are 20, 50, there are a million more who, if given the opportunity, will do better. The second point is, we don't celebrate our own. We don't celebrate our own. We don't tell our stories. And that's why we think that there are no young people who are doing excellent job. No, we need to tell our stories more. And that's why I love this conversation. Yes, Millennial conversation. You've brought other young people who are doing really well. Let them tell their stories so other people can draw inspiration. And because I see that these conversations are also meant to inspire young people. So please, my sister, have a rethink. There are young people who are doing well. Let's major on those who are doing well. And for those who are not doing well, try to win them over, because that's the thing about society and human existence. You're definitely going to get the Judas Iscariots of this world, but we've got to get them to repent and come into the fold. That is what leadership is about, and that's what organizing is about.
Quite biblical of you there, going all the way to Judas Iscariot. Thank you very much for that. I mean, there's so many more questions coming in, and I know we're supposed to talk for about 20 minutes, so we are over time, Samson. I'm sorry if I couldn't address all the questions coming in for you specifically, but thank you so much.
Always a delight. Always a delight. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But we'll keep this on. I think this energy flows very nicely into our next conversation. And everyone, do remember that we are also streaming live on YouTube. Do remember to use the hashtag A Millennial Conversation and hashtag Wando Webinar Series. As we go into this next conversation on economy, we'll be talking to Michael Famarotti, who is the Chief Economist at Steers, and he's going to be joining me right about now. So Michael, are you ready and are you there?
Hi, Fulu. Yes, I'm here. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us, Michael. How do you feel about the conversation so far?
I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I always enjoy hearing Samson speak, to be honest. I think the points that he makes about youth engagement are necessary. I don't think we like hearing all of them. I know that I don't, but it's hard to argue with the points that he makes.
Very true. Okay, so let's now look at this from an economist's point of view, right? So according to a piece that you yourself posted on Bloomberg in 2019, millennials are now on the cusp of middle age. And for those people out there who are saying, millennial, these people are looking elder. Yeah, millennial is from 1981 all the way down. Okay, so just giving you guys a heads up, that millennial tag is actually quite a wide one. And so if you are not at the cusp of middle age without having experienced the kind of economic boom that the baby boomer generation, even perhaps Generation X enjoyed. I mean, can you paint a picture of how we've inherited this current, what people will consider a dire economy? I know a lot of people saw the valuation of the Naira between last night and this morning. I was shook, as people say, but how did we get here?
Yeah, so I like answering this question because for me, there are two slightly different versions. The one that most people probably think about is that our economic woes are relatively recent. A lot of people particularly use the trend in the Naira, right? So you see things like, oh, in 2014, today, $1 can buy, close to 500, depending on where you're getting the Naira from. And I think that is sort of stark way of seeing just how much has changed in 5 or 6 years. So I do admit that a lot has changed in a very short time, and I'll come to talk about why. But I think it's very important to go a bit further back, right? Particularly because you set me up by saying, okay, boomers enjoyed, an economic boom, right? And I sort of agree, right? Particularly when we look at the 2000s, right? The first decade of the 2000s in Nigeria. I think the economy was growing somewhere around 9%. I think that decade was defined by the entrance of GSM in 2003. Everything was great, right? That decade. Yeah. People look back at that period and say the economy was going great. And on some level, it was, right? But it's also very important to point out that those good times were driven primarily by one thing, right, which is oil. During the 2000s, Nigeria really, really enjoyed the glory days of oil, right? And that powered the economy. But unfortunately, and it's very difficult for me now to sit back and say why this happened, but unfortunately, we did not use those good periods to put in place structural reforms that would ensure that in the long term, we could grow without oil. Right? So the example that I'll use is if I was a businessman in 2005, right? And I was a manufacturer who has a factory in Kano and I sold my goods in Lagos. The cost of doing business for me, even back then, was extremely high. I paid for diesel because power isn't constant. Transporting my goods from Kano to Lagos is as expensive as transporting it from Lagos to London because I'm relying on terrible roads. These roads are dangerous, right? Let's not even add in the informal fees that I pay to all sorts of agencies. Exactly. So my cost of business was incredibly high, particularly when compared to my rivals in Ghana, South Africa, and so on. But because things were so good, it did not matter. I was still making a lot of money regardless. So I had very little incentive to say, hold on, this is not sustainable, right?
Yes.
So Nigeria continued like that for years until all prices crashed, and suddenly we could no longer supercharge our way out of our structural problems, right? And that began to happen in 2014. And what I like to tell people is that, yes, a lot has changed since then, but a lot has also stayed the same. The difference is that now we are seeing things for how they genuinely were, right? There is no garnish on the economy anymore. So that's one critical thing for people to realize. The second, though, is, like I said, things have changed since 2014. And not all of these changes are due to oil prices crashing or structural problems.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these changes are because of the bad decisions that we made since then, right? And that's the reality that we must embrace, because it is up to us as millennials to begin to now demand for better decisions, particularly when it comes to policy. I vividly remember the first attempt to, or a very important attempt to remove petrol subsidies in 2012, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the response to that, right? And the results that it generated. The unfortunate thing is that between 2012 and today, Nigeria has been subject to much worse policy decisions. And at each point, the people have simply just accepted it, right? So anytime the CBN makes what I consider a policy error, it goes on. Anytime NCC does the same, it goes on. Anytime a legislator does the same, nothing happens, right? So what has happened is that these poor policy choices compound and create an environment that is not conducive to working, right? Yesterday, there was a lot of debate about ShopRite leaving the country, right? My opinion is very clear, right? The business environment is not conducive, right? And that is a function of policy, right? And that's why where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Michael, I thank you so much for that. It's very interesting. A couple of very important things that you flagged there. One of which where you talked about how people imagine that the old days were always the best. You know, that time everything was booming, and you speak very much about, well, we were making so much in excess that people were able to ignore the real structural issues that had always been there, and that now what we are seeing really is this unvarnished reality of what has always been sitting at the bottom there. And when you talk about worse policy decisions being made and people are not really, they're just letting it slide, I wonder, is it a question of people not understanding how these policy decisions affect them? Because as you referenced that 2012 incident of subsidy wanting to be removed, people were up in arms, and no one really seemed to have a grasp of the importance of seeing in reality what we can afford and what we can't. So I would like for you to sort of touch on that a little bit, please.
I could not agree more. It's very difficult for us to sit here, right, and ask the 40 or the 50 to 80 million people living in poverty who are not educated to demand better policies. They don't know what better policies look like, right? And that's why I think these conversations are so important, right? Because there is a group, right? You can call them the middle class, that mythical group. And that is a group that I consider responsible for this, right? I remember very long time ago, I listened to an LD song, right? Very long, old rap song, right? And there's a line that stuck out in the song, right? He spoke about how leaders and businessmen and successful people who leave Nigeria and see how things are done elsewhere, come back, see our own situation and still continue like that. These are the people, it's people like us, right, that should know better, that are ultimately responsible for pushing through better policies, right? And the reality is that some politicians weaponize this, right? Because when it comes to voting, each person's vote counts once. So all they need to do is rally their troops, the people that don't understand policies and just understand, I need to eat tomorrow. This politician is promising me rice. I'm going to vote for him. And generally, those people outrank the very few people who are even conscious enough to say, okay, based on the fact that I believe that this is the change that needs to happen, I am going to vote, right? And of course, this touches on what Samson spoke about in terms of us being politically active. It is a great irony that the most economically empowered group is also the most politically disenfranchised group. And that is a recipe for disaster, right? Which is why we are in this place where it's bad policy, bad decision after bad decision.
Okay, so then what skills and in what sector should Nigerian millennials position themselves to break this up, to on the one hand make sure that they're empowering themselves with the knowledge and information to recognize not just bad policy, but also to recognize when policy is a stepping stone to getting to a better place. Because as you made very valid points again, that there is that mythical unicorn status middle class that we talk about, which essentially is a number of people that have access to conversations like this, that can sit online and and burn data, because we also know that a lot of people are data counting in this nation. How do we, those of us who are here, empower ourselves with skills in different sectors for the short, medium, and long term, so that we can break up this, first of all, monoproduct status quo in terms of oil being the only thing that has been fueling us, but to create real wealth and derive value, and in creating that wealth, make sure that wealth, as Samson had referenced, helps to lift people out of poverty. Because at the end of the day, the majority of us are living in completely unacceptable spaces. How do we change that?
Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple of things to say here, right? Speaking very short term, I think from a business perspective, that's where I'll start off from. One thing to remember is that for a lot of products, Nigeria has a very small consumer market, right? Again, I remember ShopRite initially, they had very grand plans on the number of stores that they were going to open in Nigeria. 10 years later, they quickly realized that there is no market for it, right? I remember I went to, I think it was Benin or Warri recently, and I saw the ShopRite there with the mall, and I was very excited because, oh my God, this is everywhere. And I spoke to my friend who lived there, and he said, oh, don't worry, it's shutting down soon because nobody goes there, right? And that is a reality of the type of consumer market that we have, right? So the lesson for me is that a lot of people need to sell abroad, right? You need to sell to export, right? Particularly services that don't require the friction of going to customs and that kind of thing, right? The more you can sell abroad, the more you can access a well-paying consumer market, right? That's a key thing. Now, for those that are working and are in jobs and that sort of thing, I think a similar suggestion that I would make is look for the markets where your skills are most valuable. One of my favorite transformations over the last decade is how software developers are now being well paid in Nigeria. Not necessarily by the firms here, but because they're working remotely for companies abroad that appreciate the value that they bring, right? And that is not just true for software developers, but there are a host of skilled labor that you can actually provide from the comfort of your own home in Nigeria, right? So that's something that I always recommend. Long term, though, I think it's important that we all come to grips with the change that is happening in society, right? I'm not the most tech savvy, but it is very difficult to argue that there is a huge technology and data revolution taking place, right? And we need to position ourselves in different parts of the value chain. I'm not here to prescribe that people should become data scientists or engineers, but there's an entire industry, right, for people to find their niches. People can become marketing experts in that industry, right? So it's very important that we go with the global flow, because too often Nigeria likes to believe it can be different. I cannot understand why a job creation policy still hinges on the agriculture sector. The last time agriculture led to lots of poverty reduction was in the mid and late 2000s. That is unlikely going to be a strategy that works in this century, right? So from a policy level and an individual level, we have to go with the flow. And then finally, just so that we don't scare people away, because not everybody is going to be a data scientist or an engineer or whatever.
Yeah.
I like to ask a question, right? I ask young people to think about something that Google cannot teach them. If what you're doing, if the value that you are providing cannot be gotten from a machine, then you can be confident that for the foreseeable future, this is a safe occupation, right? Therapy, for example, it is very difficult for Google to provide me proper therapy sessions, right? It might not be a glamorous job, right? But that is one that looks more, it looks safer in this transformation, right? So we need to be very realistic about the changes going on and make sure that we are falling in line. That's really the summary.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Michael. A few questions are coming in, and guys, do remember you can keep dropping in those questions for us in the chat group. We'll do our best to take them, and I know we only have about 5 minutes still, but we've got this anonymous attendee that says, wow, hit the nail on the head. We should know better, but is there an element of people getting fed up and tired or not even knowing where to begin making/demanding change? For example, I wouldn't know where to start from. That's one comment there. And somebody else says, well, Babatunde says, do you think that there was no market or the level of poverty in the land? I'm not sure what that refers to specifically, but yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the first thing was on, I would call it cynicism.
Yes.
I am a very naturally cynical person. And the reality is that it does not matter if you're a cynic or you are hopeful. The reality, though, is that people, an unidentified group of people, need to do the work of building this economy and this country. Regardless of if you're fed up or you are just getting started, that work needs to be done by somebody. So it's either that you're in or you're out. And that there is no getting away from that. So I need to sign out, right? And generally that means the country, because if I'm staying here and I'm checked out, I'm simply just going to be suffering, right? So if you're here, understand that if this country is not reformed and built, we are going to be having similar discussions in 50 years. And at that point, we are going to have 200 million Nigerians living in poverty. And those people are going to be living outside your doorstep. And you're not going to feel very safe when that's the case.
Just saying that in addition to creating a more conducive environment for ourselves and to experience that economic boom or at least benefit, how do we begin to ensure that we're raising that next generation to be above the poverty line and to create more equitable economic opportunities for more of us, if not for all? How do we do that?
Okay. I'll start with the bad news and then the less bad news, and then I'll get to the slightly less bad news. The bad news is that economists have been struggling with the question of how poor countries become rich for the last 250 years, and we still don't have clear answers. So there is no, you go to a doctor and you get treated and you know that you're fine. Economic prescriptions are essentially, try this and see if it works, because we're not quite sure, right? So that's bad news. The slightly less bad news is we have good ideas of what we can do. The least less bad news is that a lot of these good ideas have less to do with the economy and more to do with the institutions in your country, right?
Okay.
So at the start of this call, Samson and I were talking about the last time
Yes.
we met, and it was at a Fix Politics. Now, I spoke at that conference, and the theme of the discussion was to fix the economy, we have to fix politics, right? Because we need to fix politics to fix institutions, right? There is no economic, we know how to build infrastructure. It is not difficult. The economics is not hard. The engineering is not hard either, right? What is hard in Nigeria is implementation. That is an issue of governance, of institutions. Things tend to just fall apart when you move from theory to practice, right? And that is what we need to focus our energies fixing over the next 20, 30 years, so that when we look at what has worked in China or Kenya and we import it here and change it, it also works, right? And does not hit that typical Nigerian roadblock of when it's time to execute, we just don't do it well, right? So for me, the very simple answer to that is there is no institutional reform from governance, from politics, and entering leadership positions in the business and industry environments as well.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Michael. Thank you so much. Guys, Michael's time with us is up for now, but of course, he's still going to be in the background having conversations. You can continue the chat in the chat room. Again, don't forget to join the conversation on social media. We do want to know what everyone thinks. Use the hashtag Millennial Conversation and the hashtag Owando Webinar Series as we go on to the next speaker for today. So Michael, thank you very much. I do know that there are still several questions coming through, so I'm just going to read out these questions just so that you guys out there as well, our audience, are thinking about these things, and so you can contribute in different ways. One person, anonymous, says, but I'm tired mentally, emotionally, physically. I mean, I'm dying. People just can't seem to motivate themselves out of it. And that's why we find ourselves in this space where we're trying to talk and trying to find a way through. We have got lined up next, Bright Jaja, who's the CEO and founder of iCreate. Bright, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, so Bright is going to be joining us in the conversation really on closing the skills gap. Because as you've heard, all these things are flowing really nicely into each other, Bright. We're looking at how it's very important that on a policy level, we really get involved. Because if we don't know the foundations on which this country is built, on which we can move and how it's structured, there's no way we can make it better for us. Even when it comes to the economy, it's all tied into the policies that are being played out and how people are involved in that. But something that's also flowed through those conversations is the reality that there is a bit of a skills gap. There's a knowledge gap. A lot of us, even those who are in seemingly better positions, really are feeling helpless. That's what this last comment was about, being tired emotionally, mentally, physically. What are your thoughts on the conversation so far and how that pertains to a skills gap?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think for me, so far, I've just been really excited because for the first time, I would say we have a table that is around our conversation. The reason why I said that is this. Some of the major decisions that are made that affect young people, most of the times, young people are not part of those conversations. And that's one of the major problems. You have a conversation about skills development or skills policy or something about youth development, and you have the people who are in charge of this entire conversation or entire system or structure, and they are all above 50, right? And their time, the knowledge that they acquired during their time is literally irrelevant for this time. Like, no matter the ideas that you have from that time is literally irrelevant for this time. And those are those ideas that they bring on the table because they don't have a new perspective. They don't have a young person saying, this is what's going on now. This is how we should go, So just being in this space where you now have young people really talking about the problems facing young people and how we can, work together and take responsibility to solve this problem is just really amazing. So I really want to thank Owando for doing this. This is great. I think I've listened to, I tuned in really, really early. So I listened to Samson and also Michael. And I think it just aligns from the policy perspective. Young people need to get involved. I like what Samson said about young people need to understand that they have a responsibility. It's not a choice, right? Whatever you do right now would show in the next 20, 25 years. And that time your kids will be living in those times. And they would ask you the same question we're asking our fathers now. What did you guys do? Why did you guys let it become this bad, right? So
absolutely, history will judge us.
Yes. So you have to understand clearly that you have a role to play. Talking about skill gap, I'm just going to give a bit of perspective. Now, we need to understand that right now we have about 115 million people in our workforce. That, when I say workforce, I mean the people who are aged to work, right? And I can tell you for sure that the people that actually are working are not up to 30%, right? And then let's say coronavirus came into play and a lot of people lost their jobs, because I know even in Africa, we had to let some people go. Let's say about 20% are actually working right now, or let's say about 10% are working good jobs enough to be able to feed their families and all of that. So the skill gap, the unemployment rate is really, really high, right? Now the skill gap level, Nigeria presently has a skill gap of 926 trades. Now, the trades that we're not even involving, like we don't have young people, we don't even have anybody even going towards that sector.
So please go back and say that again. Like, let's take that story and explain what this means. We have a gap of what?
The skilled trades that Nigerians are not even involved in are 926. Yes, skills trade, because everybody wants to be lawyers and doctors and bankers and the rest of them. So you have Togolese and Benin Republic and all of those guys coming into the country to do these jobs, right? So this is just to give you a perspective of how we have almost 25 to 30 million young people who have no jobs, because they don't have the skills that are required to do the jobs, and because they're not interested in the jobs that are available, not because the jobs are not available.
That's a very important thing. Please say that again. People are not interested in the jobs that are available.
So it's not like we don't have jobs, we don't have jobs. No, and I wouldn't blame them. Because it's not their fault. They are brought up in a society that says for you to succeed, you have to go to university, get a degree, and work in an office with suit and tie. That is how society perceives success. That is the definition of success in our society today. And that is the problem. And for me, I still cannot understand, because it just doesn't make sense. Why does it make sense is this? How do you have River State, where you have a huge part of River State is covered with water? Do you know how much opportunities are in that space? Why don't we have a water technology university that can understand the potentials and the opportunities just on that water, from fishing to packaging, all of that stuff, and have that kind of university in that space, right? Why can't we identify what resources is available in the state, like use our common sense and design universities to equip young people with the skills that is required to do those jobs? But no, we just all want to work in the bank. How many banks do we have? We just all want to become lawyers. How many cases do we have? Do you get what I'm saying? That's the problem.
Yeah, so right, what you're saying, it sounds like, okay, right from the beginning. And what you're saying to me doesn't sound like it's not just a school issue. It's not just an educational, institutional issue. This is from the home.
Yes.
This is from the family. This is from people's parents, which is where a lot of these job decisions start, saying that their definition of success, or the idea of success and how people can make something of themselves, is very skewed in an industrialist, westernized viewpoint. It's this idea that everyone has to go this route. Whereas when we look at our industrial or our Western neighbors, let's look at the UK, for example, skill sets or jobs like plumbing. The plumber is probably the most highly paid, like, non-university necessarily individual that you can think of.
Yes. You're right.
So how do we then get families, maybe first of all, on that base level, especially for millennials, or even for millennials, the younger end of the spectrum, to start tweaking that mindset? Because it sounds like it starts from in here, and that's a very important direction to start in.
Yeah, so that for us, that was the key thing, because when we went into, you know, what we're doing now under I Create Africa, which is changing perception, right? We understood that the background of the problem is the societal perception. We understood that if we're able to change that, then that would apply into the investment and the resources to create infrastructures that would train young people in the skills that are in demand, right? Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's changing that perception by creating new image, by creating, you know, getting young people to understand that, see, bricklaying is a great job. Yes, it looks dirty, but with the technology that we have now, you can still be a cool bricklayer. You can still be a cool plumber. Do you get what I'm saying? And that's the stories that we're telling now. We're telling stories because one thing about people is this: people are changed, or people become by what they see and what they hear. Yes. And if at the end of the day, every single image that you see of technical vocational skill trades portrays poverty, portrays illiteracy, you know, the lower people in society, the people that do these jobs, you don't want to get involved in these things, right? So what we're doing now is changing that narrative and getting young people to tell their stories on how they're able to affect their families by working in these jobs. And we've been able to collaborate with major organizations like the World Skills, where you have 85 member countries coming together, including China, Russia, America, UK, all coming together to showcase the skills of young people, just like the Olympics. You know, so that is the key factor. But at the same time, another major thing is the government, when it comes to the educational sector, when it comes to TVET, when it comes to the educational sector entirely, including universities and polytechnics, we need to really stop following the West.
Okay, let me pause you right there. Because that's going to take us a little bit deeper, because there's a question here that's come in. And to our viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to a Millennial Conversation. Change does start with us. Please use the Q&A feature if you'd like to drop questions for us, okay? There is a Q&A feature to join the conversations, and on social media, use the hashtag Millennial Conversation or a hashtag Oando Webinar Series. Those questions will be forwarded here so that we can get into them. Bright, someone asked, how do we put in place a structure that will address those skill gaps present in our country? That's an important one, because as you're sort of going into this narrative of moving away from those westernized structures, those westernized perception of work, I wonder, how do we then create structures here that will begin to address the skill gaps that are present in our country?
China, I'm sad to say, but China is the best example, right? Okay. China have designed, I've come to understand that they have a lot of people, right? And the key thing with people are the key resources, because no matter how many and how much natural resources you have, if you don't have people to harness it, then it's a waste of time, right? So China has understood that they have people. They might not have the natural resources, but they have people. So what they did was to put educational structures in place to train people based on their strength. Two things structures that we're going to put in place. First, let's train people based on available resources. And then let's train people based on their strength, right? Let's create a mapping system across the country. It's very simple. We have this geopolitical zone. When it comes to the north, what is core in that place? What do they have when it comes to natural resources? What kind of people do they have there, right? And how do we create a university or a technical institution or an institution that can teach them on how to leverage on that resources? That is the key. Because at the end of the day, we are going to be 1 billion people by 2030. 1 billion people we're going to have 1 billion people in our workforce by 2030. I mean the whole of Africa. And this problem we're talking about right now is not just Nigeria, it's the whole of Africa, right? We're going to have 1 billion people. The world will be looking to Africa when it comes to technical and vocational skills, when it comes to skills and labor, 100%.
Yes, that is true.
Time to stop looking towards them, because we've been looking towards them, and now they're saying, oh, we don't need what you have because we already have it. We need what we don't have, and we believe that you are the one that should have it. So let's start identifying our resources, create institutions that can train people to leverage on that resources.
Okay.
And this is across technical and vocational skill trades. We should be a nation that supplies the highest level of technical and vocational skills across the world.
I love that. Up next, another question or another comment, someone saying you raise a very valid point. There are too many lawyers, for example, and the 50+ age, their parent group encourage them to all do law, medicine, engineering. But in reality, those are just more respectful jobs or respected jobs as opposed to needed jobs. They're certainly not for everyone. And all the people that had interest in IT, software engineering in the early 2010s are actually doing really well now. Animators, cinematographers, graphic designers too. Very good comment there. We've got another one that's coming that says, to reduce the country's poverty level, you need to invest in industries, eradicate bad governance, which we can do, but we can't eradicate corruption. And it's not possible. And given that, and to give everyone access to education of a high standard, you know, I can explain more about that later on, but that's interesting. This corruption angle, I wonder how that plays into people acquiring skill sets in terms of nepotism, when you do have certain structures there, or you do have certain industries that people are trying to invest in. I wonder, what are your thoughts on that in general?
Corruption, I think I have two perspectives. The first one would be the general perspective, which is, if we don't get involved in the conversation, we are literally allowing a space for corruption. Let me tell you why I said that.
Okay.
Now, there's already a structure that has been existing for years. And this structure we have seen has not worked. Yes. What young people do best, like Samson said, is to go online and become activists and talk and tweet and, you know, do all of that stuff. But the question I'm always asking is, are you in a position where they can call you and say, what do you think about this? Because we're working on this project. Have you put yourself in a position where they can say, oh, it's skills development. Oh, we should call Bright because Bright is doing an amazing job in this space, right? How many young people do we have who are beyond talking and doing research on Google and tweeting just to sound smart on Twitter, actually have acquired the capacity, and not just acquired the capacity, but shown example that they have solutions. And when you have solutions, then you get into a position, you get it at the table where you are now part of the conversation for you to give out positive and quality advice. Because trust me, what people don't understand is this. We are the only ones, we, the millennials, are the only ones that have answers to the questions of this time. I can tell you for sure because I've been in a lot of rooms, and I can tell you for sure that we are the only ones that have answers to the question. So if you want to be part of the change, you have to get involved and get a position on that table where you can suggest your opinions that can actually work. You don't do it by talking. You do it by...
But this thing you said, right? So what does it look like when someone isn't just blowing hot air, and when they actually have something to contribute that's meaningful and can help build capacity? And also bearing in mind that there are a number of young people who have opinions, who have possible solutions, who do not share them for fear of being shut down. Let's not forget that at least in Nigeria, and maybe broadly speaking in Africa, we are from a culture where a young person is not encouraged to speak up in a room with older people. In fact, if you dare put forward a dissenting view, you chop slap first before anything else. You know, so it is one thing to say, get involved, do this, you know, get involved, but what does that look like, and how do we start getting us, our people, our friends, people that we know have skill sets, people that we know have things to contribute meaningfully to take that risk? Because it is a risk. How do you get people to take the risk?
The question is, how did we get here? Samson is here, Michael is here, I'm here, you're here. Everybody here right now, right? Why did they pick us to have this conversation? The reason why they picked us to have the conversation is because we have physical proof of growth, of change, things that we are doing. We're young people. Do you get what I'm saying? We're all young people. So it's it's beyond talking and actually acting. It's one thing to say, oh, I can do this. It's another thing to show example of what you have done or what you're doing. I've gotten calls to, I was at the Berlin summit to talk about technical and vocational education. And I was the only young person that was an individual that was not a minister of education. They invited 6 ministers of education from 6 African countries. I was the only young person that was not a minister on that panel. Because I have examples, physical examples of concept that has been proven and has made real change. Now, you might not be in a position to drive that, but what do? You identify people who are driving and support them. That's what you do. Not everybody will get a position to get a voice and say something, right? But you identify people who, like Samson, like Michael, who are doing something positive. Yes, there are lots of them on Twitter, a lot of them on Instagram, a lot of young people doing amazing things. Find and align and work with them, and together, that's how we change the narrative.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And just to add in, seeing as you lumped me into this group of change makers, I'll take it. I'm a change maker myself. There's a form of activism internally that has to happen where you've got to be willing to fight. You've got, I've fought my family thought I was insane. You've got to be willing to fight the status quo, because the status quo exists for a reason. We're very used to following the way things have been done, It doesn't encourage critical thinking. It doesn't encourage change. If you want change to happen, you've got to do things differently. And as Bright says, you've got to act. There is no substitute for action, because the faster you act, the faster you can fail and then reset, do a 2.0, figure out how to do it better, to support better. More comments are coming in as we've got a few minutes still. Nimi says, I think that from career counseling pre-uni, these skill traits are not communicated. They're not promoted, talking about vocational skill sets. And that's very true when people are making the decision what to do with the rest of their lives, which we force people to do at quite a young age. It's very interesting. And says that the systems are not available for these newer opportunities in our space. Someone else says we live in a very classist, elitist society generally, and there is an attitude towards technical and vocational skills, which is something you referenced. And another individual says, I personally believe that our country's policies will keep on crippling everything, they put in caps, we are addressing, and the problems that we are solving or attempting to solve, and that initiatives have come and gone, home and abroad. So isn't it hopeless? How do we deal with that?
Well, that's a question for me?
Yes, that's a question for you. I mean, that's a big one.
Can you say it again?
Essentially, they're saying, the policies keep crippling everything. And that a lot of initiatives, they've come, they've gone. And so doesn't it just feel hopeless? That how do we deal with that? Because it seems like whatever happens, the country's policies will show up and press spoil on all the plans.
That's exactly the same thing I just said. And the same thing that Samson is saying. We are the only ones that can change that. We are the ones that have the answers to those questions. We are the ones that have the energy and time to do the research, to get the right policies, or suggest the right policies that can work. Us, right? But if we don't do the work, nobody's going to do it. We have to position ourselves. I have been in, like I said, recently there was something that happened recently with ITF, and I was part of the conversation. And I was able to give ideas that they were like, oh yeah, we could take this, and that they're actually working on right now. Do you understand? And that's going to benefit a lot of young people. Well, because I am in that table to have that conversation. So whatever change that we need, it's not going to come from heaven, not going to come from the West. It's going to come from here, from your house, from home. And it starts with you actually taking out time to equip yourself with information, to do the research, like Samson said, understand the Constitution, understand the rules of policies when it comes to education. If that's your interest, you don't have to read everything. Just focus on the one that's your interest, focus on it, get as many information as possible. Try to see how you can use your natural knowledge, which works with this time, and put in structures and suggest it. Find someone who is in a position, who is young, who's in a position that they listen, people that they listen to, and suggest it to this person and say, yo, I have this idea. What do you think about it? Do you think it's going to work? And they can get it to the table. But we have to work together for this to happen.
I love that. We've got to work. Can't afford to be tired. This is not the time to be tired, because the people that are making the bad policies, they're not tired of making bad policies. They're going to sit there and they're going to keep governing as long as we keep taking this attitude of, I can't, please, I can't come and go and kill myself. But the bad policies will kill all of us. if we don't do the work that needs to be done. Bright, I'm just going to keep you with me for a few more minutes if you don't mind, because there's still more conversations coming in. We've got Olumide, who says, glad to be here. The primitive mindset and overzealous expectations of the generation before us have caused a huge gap, and that's directly affected us millennials based on societal standards. So what can we do as millennials to change the narrative from the way our parents who still live in that industrial era of that livelihood? How do we change that narrative? I think it's going back again to some of the conversation. I think you may have answered that, but just in summary, very quickly.
Get off social media and get on Google, do research, get information. I think one of the biggest problem, this is kind of a little bit off the question, but one of the biggest problem that we have in Africa is we're so good at consuming and not good at creating. Now, one of the biggest problem now is there's TikTok, there's now Reels on Instagram, there's Twitter, there's all of the social media, and they take our time. I took my phone one day and I got this alert on how much screen time I had.
The screen, oof.
Yo.
It's always shocking.
I was like, wait, what? Right. And then I went to Instagram, I'm like, oh, like 14 hours. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Right. But this is real. We're getting addicted to this thing. We're spending quality time. What we need to understand is this: time and value are related. Time is money. Time is value. Every single second you spend on Instagram, somebody's making money from that. Somebody somewhere is cashing out. You're giving, so basically you're giving money. You can't tell me that you're broke, because every single second that you spend doing something, somebody's making money out of it. Now my question to you is, what are you doing that is taking somebody's time that gives you money? I guess that should answer the question.
Okay. More stuff coming in. I'm absolutely loving it. Hilda says, listen, I would say that we are privileged young people. And Hilda, we have mentioned our privilege here because having access to technology is a huge privilege. As she says, the majority of young Nigerians over 18 cannot switch on a computer and they don't know what Google is. And that is the challenge, because if you are here, you have privilege. So what is the fate of the 20-year-old in Sokoto that cannot even relate to this particular conversation because historically they've not had access to education and skills development? And I'm going to tie that in with another one by Anonymous that's quite frustrated. Anonymous says, we are having the conversations, we're having them. Millennials are having world-changing conversations worldwide, and more of us are quote unquote positioned. But the problem is the people in charge, and they put this in capital so you understand how strongly they feel about it, will not call on you. They think that what you are doing is cute, that's nice for you, but they'll run it down to profit from it. So what more involvement do we need? So on the one hand, the privilege, and how does that translate to the person that doesn't have the access that we have? And on the other hand, okay, they've positioned us, but they're still willing to run down what we're doing for profits.
I'm sorry, my answers will keep going back down to it's on you. Why? Let me say this. This conversation is about the role that young people play, right? Like that's the conversation.
Yes, change starts with us.
With you, right? So it goes down on you at the end of the day. Now, this is it. There are different levels, and these really different levels of young people are based on their exposure and the opportunities, right? Now, if you are privileged to be in a space where you have opportunities, like you have access to internet, or you're brought up in a family that is privileged and all of that stuff, it's your responsibility to make sure that you bridge the gap, right? To bridge that gap, that you create solution for the next person that wasn't privileged or that is not privileged. Create a solution for that guy in the community and make sure that he's able to at least have a sustainable living, right? That's the job. I'll give you an example of what Hamzat is doing with Follow the Money. Hamzat is smart. He's a smart guy. He's doing something really amazing. He's going to the community and making sure that every single penny that was given in the budget is spent for the people.
Guys, please go check that out. Follow the Money. It's actually really interesting, and it's a lot of information for you there for those that want to, in terms of accountability, what our government is doing, how certain budgets are being spent. That's really important. Sorry, Bright, please go ahead.
So what Hamza is doing, Hamza has been in a position where he's privileged to have access to quality education and all of that, and he's using that knowledge and that energy and that time, and he's taking it back to the community. So the first thing is, if you are privileged, you're in a position of privilege, you have to understand that you have way bigger responsibility. That is, I'm sure that answers that question. For the other question, yes, trust me, I go through that every single day. But you cannot chase the lion out of the jungle by just coming in and going out. You have to keep coming every single day. You don't stop. There's nothing if it was easy to change would have been done a long time ago. Because this starts today. From our forefathers, they've tried, right? But the point is, you don't give up. You keep on pushing. We've got in situations where some people have tried to sabotage our structure. A lot of things will happen to you, and that's the truth. But you have to be prepared for that, because you should know that when you go into you're going into this kind of position to change things, you are going to face challenges. So yes, we face this thing every day, but that doesn't mean we're going to give up. We're going to keep going till one day, just one day, they will hear our voice, and what we're saying would actually work for the system. Just
guys,
keep going.
buckle up. Buckle up is a bumpy ride, but why need? Unless you want to jump ship, we're inside together, all of us. I love this one from Isaboye, who says, power is taken, never given. Also facts. But Ibie, and this is the last question, I'm going to point in your direction, Bright, and then I'm going to let you sink back and continue to enjoy the conversation. Ibie says, how can change start with us when we as students were still using 1960 curriculum? I mean, we can't change the curriculum to make life better in our country. What can we do, says Ibie.
Hey, what's the person's name? Sorry.
Ibie.
Ibie?
Yes.
Okay. If it was 10, 15 years ago, I'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. There's nothing we can do. But in this time where you have access to the internet, you can literally have a whole section on LinkedIn Learning, like a whole curriculum, a whole training, and you actually have solution for a particular problem. You have YouTube, where you have a lot of information. You have companies creating 1 hour, 2 hour webinars, dishing out information. I think the level of information that we have, we can't exhaust it in the next 20, 25 years. So I don't think that's an excuse. Yes, we have a very messed up curriculum. Yes, we have structures that are not working for us, but at the same time, we have access to the internet where we can get information that is relevant for this time. So I would say, go to the internet, don't go on social media, go to the internet when it comes to like Google, or you go to LinkedIn, or you go to, there are lots of platforms right now that you can get, quality information from and learn. Absolutely. And learn a skill.
Bright, thank you so much for that. Truly appreciate it. I will also just chip in to say, guys, the same energy used to find illegal downloads of movies. Yes, I said it. I'm calling everybody out. The same energy used to find illegal downloads of film, book, things that you have no business illegally downloading. Put that energy towards downloading information that could help you. Yes, it's true. There's some curriculums that don't work, but the fact that you know enough that this isn't up to date means that you have access to the internet enough to know that there's better information out there, and you can get that information. It's a click away. The whole world is online currently. If it wasn't before COVID, a lot of the information you need is definitely there now. So please make use of that. Bright, before I let you go, please shout out, let people know how they can get in touch with your platform, I Create, and how to get in touch with you after this session, please.
Okay, so first of all, we just launched our Skillers platform, which is a digital marketplace that connects skilled workers to opportunities and to jobs, not just within their community, but across the globe. So I'll ask you guys, if you have the skill, any kind of skills, from barbering to tech skills to construction, go to skillers.ng and sign up so we can create a skills profile for you and start pushing you out there. You can reach us on, my Instagram is official Bright Jaja personally, and I Create Africa is our Instagram account. Anytime, any day, you can send us a DM, and we're here to always respond to you.
Fantastic. Bright, thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it. And for those of you who are wondering about everyone else that was up, for Samson as well as for Michael, you can find their information online as well. And I know that after this webinar, if it isn't already up online, Oando will make sure that you have access to everybody if you want to continue asking the questions. But we are still here, and we've still got some great conversations to go. So please do keep those questions coming in. I'm loving the conversation. Now we're going to switch lanes and talk a little bit more about technology, because it's all connected, Bright. Thank you. And we've got the fantastic and very impressive Odunayo Eweni. She's the co-founder of PiggyVest. She'll be joining us now. We'll be talking technology and the fourth industrial revolution. So there she is. Odunayo, how are you doing? And thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm doing
Exactly.
for you.
What have been your thoughts on the conversation so far? Listening to how people feel and what's been suggested.
I think that it's clear that people, like everyone agrees that it's time for young people to take a more central role in shaping the direction that Nigeria and possibly the entire continent takes as regards like moving everything forward. We've been passive for too long, essentially. So this is a step in the right direction.
Thank you for that. Odoyo, you've been very front and center in a lot of the technological change we've seen, especially when it comes to saving and young people getting involved in that. And digital technology has been a fundamental enabler for development, for inclusion, and prosperity across the continent, whether it's telecoms, internet being democratized, and we actually referenced that time period and how it affected the economy. We're looking at mobile payment. It's revolutionizing finance and commerce. But the world is heading towards what they call a fourth industrial revolution, which is essentially that integration of tech in every aspect of life. But understanding the poverty levels that exist here, where is Nigeria positioned against the rest of the world? And how do millennials get involved in pushing us closer to this fourth industrial revolution, so to speak?
I don't think that we can measure like the progress that Nigeria has made in technology in terms of revolution relative to the rest of the world because we are technically still playing catch up, right? I think if you compared like the revolution that the world has had, Nigeria is still very early on in its like the process of its evolution and its use of technology and its adoption. But we are making progress, and that's the good news, is that over the past 4 or 5 years, you've seen the tech ecosystem go from small and non-existent to become a force to reckon with, to become one of the most powerful sectors now in the Nigerian economy, one of the most influential. And we're still building that up, right? I'm a startup founder. I've been in tech for roughly 7 years, and I've seen the ecosystem grow from where like it's just young people with computers to building global companies that are attracting funding from the international market. And that's all being done by millennials, done by Gen Z. So I think that while we do not need to benchmark our progress against the rest of the world, because we did start late and we are still late, compared to everyone else, we have like an incredibly large number of poor people in the country. Smartphone adoption isn't as commonplace as it is in every place else. So it's very important that while we look to the rest of the world as the place that we want to go, they're not like the measures of progress per se when you're talking about revolutions.
But then how do millennials get involved in actively pushing us closer to maybe not a revolution, maybe that's the wrong word, but to make sure that we're not so far behind. I mean, we have a unique situation, right? So we've got to find unique solutions to deal with where we are, because the reality is what the reality is. And how do people who do have access, like us, to this tech, how do we help in making this, in making it more prosperous for us? So forget even comparison to the rest of the world. How do we make sure our people are good? That's what we need to know.
Well, I think, and this is going to sound very cliche, I think that we just do it, right? Technology is beautiful in the fact that the barrier to entry to technology is almost non-existent. Like your only limit is really your imagination. So I believe that, right, there's some limits to growing a company in Nigeria, ease of doing business, funding, regulation, and so many other surrounding things. But one of the things that's not restricted is you getting on your computer, getting on your phone, and starting to learn and starting to create, right? We need help across so many other things. I would love to see more millennials at the helm shaping the policy that affects the tech ecosystem. But that's like on the like other side of things. On the side of creation, your only limit is your imagination. The answer is to just start. And I will use myself as an example, right? Both my parents are university lecturers, right? And when I grew up, the one thing that they did, and I recognized that it was a huge privilege to be able to have a desktop computer in the house to start to understand how you can use it. But one great thing now with tech is that everything, technology and gadgets are getting cheaper, right? You know, before, to get a smartphone, you had to have up to 100,000 naira. The Chinese manufacturers are making it so easy for someone to buy a techno phone and be connected to a person who uses a Samsung or an iPhone. And same thing for HP computers and Apple computers and Dell computers. The barrier to entry into tech, the barrier to entry into learning to program, the barrier to entry into learning to create is so low now, right? There's so many free resources that encourage millennials to get in there, learn, take your own destiny into your hands, right? There's how I will say that, like, pivoting into that last conversation about the curriculum. There is no curriculum in Nigeria currently that teaches you how to be a tech founder, none. But what you have is the internet. You have edX, you have Coursera, you have Harvard Business School online, you have thousands of MOOCs and thousands of foreign and great universities that have put their content on the internet to help you. I graduated from computer engineering, I work in fintech. And people always ask me, how do you do it? But like, the answer is the internet. I've used Harvard Business School to learn about alternative investments. I've used Coursera to learn about accounting. What are you going to do? I'm not going to sit down here and tell you that the entire environment is enabling, because it isn't. But a lot of it is, don't be limited by your imagination and don't be limited by what you perceive to be barriers. It's hard, but it only gets harder if you stop yourself and just don't do it. So my advice is usually just start. And then you realize that you start to figure all these things out.
Antonio, so like what you said to me is like so spot on. It's not sexy. It's not a sexy response, but just start, do the work. And and it's interesting because even when you said that, like, it's going to sound cliche, I think there's a tendency, and maybe it's not just in the millennial age group, which is quite a wide one anyways, but there is this tendency to feel like there needs to be this one solution. We've got to have, there's going to be this one thing or this one person or this one leader. We've got a serious savior complex that is affecting our activity and our impact in our community. It's phenomenal. It's so interesting. And going off with that, a pessimist would see difficulty in every opportunity, because for every time that we say you can try this or you can act, there's always someone who says, oh, but it's hard, it's hard, it's hard. So, I mean, I want to know, what are some of the challenges that are faced by digital actors today, and how can those be translated into an opportunity for the country to become, I mean, is it ambitious to say a global tech leader, or at least to have leading minds within the country playing in that global tech space, and knowing that when people want to know how technology can be used to navigate unconventional spaces or countries, they come to us because we've done it and we've succeeded. How what are the opportunities there?
So I think that a lot of the opportunities and the challenges, which are both tied together, that Nigerians have with starting businesses or starting tech businesses, is mostly structural, right? Registering a company is still kind of hard. I mean, and I will say that the CAC has been taking steps to make it easy, but it's still hard, right? The entire situation with, when you start a company abroad, you're thinking of an office space, you're thinking of paying your bills. And in Nigeria, you're thinking of an office space, you're thinking of how, like, you have to bribe the people around the office so that your property is protected. You're thinking of how to pay TV tax. You're thinking of generators and backup to your internet, because internet is never stable. All of those problems are structural, and all of those problems represent opportunities. Right. Okay. The right, like, look at like the state of delivery and e-commerce in Nigeria, for instance.
Okay.
Nigeria has we have 200 million people. And even if we drill down to only people who cannot afford to shop online, you still come to about 30 million people. If those 30 million people were able to reliably order for things on the internet and get it delivered at the time that they said it will be delivered, don't you think that like our e-commerce space would be more welcoming to the likes of Amazon and to people like ShopRite, who are now trying to plan their exit out of the country? The logistics system is a nightmare, and no one has been able to hack it yet. That's a challenge and an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's the same thing across so many different sectors.
Yeah.
The educational system, we're still using the same curriculum that our parents used or something. If there is a way there's an opportunity there, but it also currently represents a problem, because that's why we're not getting the right talent. No one is going to tell you, because Nigerians leave Nigeria and become some of the brightest like stars wherever they land. Why? Because you're already naturally resilient. What if our country, what if everything around us was designed to nurture that resilience inside of Nigeria? That's how I kind of see it. Right. So it's really about like looking at there's challenges everywhere, and they represent opportunities for people who are able to sit and like make the decision to try to fix it. Becoming a global tech leader in is not actually something that's very hard. Look at China, look at India. India has somehow been able to parlay their large population also into gigantic tech companies that people like Facebook and Google are investing in. Why not Nigeria? Right? Yeah. Our tech talent is already famous. With the advent of people like Andela into the ecosystem, Nigerian programmers became like sought after by the global market. Now we have Nigerians working in Nigeria for international and multinational companies. If we thought about applying that to other sectors of the economy, fixing all of those challenges, then it just becomes it becomes just like non-negotiable for the international market to reckon with us. Yeah. But a lot of these problems are foundational and they're structural, and they do represent opportunities, but again, they're incredibly hard. And I mean, we are the next generation to try to fix it, and I hope that we can figure out how to. There's so many companies already like looking at different sectors of the economy and providing solutions, but the problems kind of run deeper than that, and we will still need more.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we've got this great questions coming from Shedrack that wants to say that he says, Oduanyo, it's great work that you're doing with PiggyVest. Could you tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you're doing in that area with PiggyVest?
Right. So PiggyVest is an automated savings platform that offers micro savings and micro investments to Nigerians. And this is an example of what I was trying to talk about, like opportunities and challenges are everywhere. On December 31, 2015, I was using Twitter, and we saw a lady who had a wooden box, and she had broken it, and that whole year she had saved 1,000 naira inside it, and she had 300, inside an actual colo, exactly. She had 365,000 naira inside it. And there's two things I wanted to point out here. The conversation on Twitter that day was, I want a colo as well, right? My co-founder, however, Joshua, brought that photo to our group chat and said, how can we make this digital, right? So Piggy Bank is essentially a digital colo. That's how the idea came about. Okay. And that's what I'm trying to say, that like, obviously there's a challenge that the woman was trying to solve there. She wants to save frequently. She wants to have control over it. She doesn't want to touch it. Somehow that represented a challenge for her, but an opportunity for someone else, because Joshua saw that, and then we built a company that's now 4.5 years old on the back of that problem, right? So PiggyVest now allows people save anywhere from 100 naira a day to 10,000 naira a week. There's people who can invest for as low as 5,000 naira in curated investment opportunities from verified providers on the platform, and so many more. And we've been doing that for 4.5 years because we believe that millennials, if we are going to solve any of these problems that we're outlining, have to achieve financial freedom. And that's why we do what we do. That's what we're about.
That's so important. Thank you so much. That financial freedom, financial stability, and understanding how to control your money and where to put it and how to use it. That's really where it starts from. And it seems that for a lot of the millennial generation, it seems that it's starting later and later, or for some reason, these habits are not being built up earlier. I don't know. I feel like, because for me, I speak for myself. I know that my saving habits really kicked in a lot later in my mid to late 20s. And now in my 30s, I'm like, okay, I'm now like, woof, let's go. But there's a lot of that to consider as well. Still more of the questions coming in. Before I go to the questions, there's something else I wanted to talk about. Inevitably, whenever there's a woman in front of me, the question of gender bias always comes up, especially in what people perceive as traditional male-dominated industries or sectors. I would go as far as to say that really, is there any sector that's not particularly male-dominated? even when you think that it shouldn't be, because somebody will say, oh, the kitchen, the men are the chefs, really, if you think about it. But I wonder, would you say that there is a gender bias in this country towards young female tech leaders? And if so, what recommendations are there to close the gap in terms of the number of women that are even there represented at all? And what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So I would say very simply that there isn't any sector in Nigeria or anywhere really that there isn't a bias against women. And then there's also the presence of ageism in Africa, where older people are generally seen as more knowledgeable. So when you combine that with the innate sexism, being a young woman trying to lead anything is significantly more difficult. But I think that a lot of the solution comes from like environmental and like just the things that you take into yourself. Right? It's hard to be a woman anywhere. It's hard to be a woman in business. It's hard to be a woman in tech. It's hard to be a woman in banking, right? When I started in tech, there was just so many microaggressions and lots of instances of sexism to face and to defeat that I could easily have like made a whole career out of fixing those problems. But that's not why we're here. So I usually would tell women that there was sexism, there is sexism, there will be sexism, but what would also continue to exist is a problem that you're trying to fix. So a laser focus on where you're going is one of the most important things. Some of us were lucky to be raised by parents who don't believe in gender roles, and some women are not as lucky. But the entire thing is that women now need to be able to look up and see that there's women in so many different positions that they too can attain it. And that's why if you're here, if you're leading any industry, I believe that you should be focused on achieving your goal. And then you should be vocal about your achievements. This is what I've done. Why?
That's the other
because
one, vocal about your achievements.
Yes, representation matters, right? When we were in university studying, I studied computer engineering and looking forward at like people who could be your role model in computer engineering. There was two women. One of them is Funke Okweke. The other lady, I can't remember her name right now. Those were the only two women that we could look up to. Today, when you are a young woman who wants to go into tech, you can look at so many other people. You can look at Lade, you can look at Maya Hogan Famo doing VC, you can look at me in tech, you can look at Temi of Lifebank, Honey working at the UK Nigerian Tech Hub. Just because women who go before you are going to hold the door open for the women coming after, it doesn't have to be as hard for the women coming before us. And you need to say, this is how I did it, right? Focus, self-awareness. And self-awareness is something that my parents used to instill in us all the time. People can call you anything. What matters is what you call yourself, right? What matters is where you're going, who are you? And it's really hard. I'm not going to say that there are some days when people will say they can't have a conversation with a woman because women are unreasonable. But what happens then is I'm going to tell you, okay, so you're going to have it with only me because I'm the one who is going to help you. And so until you overcome whatever it is that is causing your innate bias, this conversation, this deal, this partnership is not moving forward, right? So I think that you face it head on and you don't let it distract you because it will always be there, right? Yeah. There's feminism and the fight for women's liberation has been going on for thousands of years and it's going to continue. And so the advice is usually just don't let it be a distraction because it can fully well be a distraction because of how pervasive it is. But there's women doing and achieving so many things that you can't let that stop you ever. You just move forward, you just forge ahead. And then you achieve and then you're loud about it. One, so they can see you are not who they say you are. And two, so the women coming behind can hear how vocal you are about your achievements and how important they are and how much they're making change and know that they can too.
Adon, you're like fantastic. I don't think I could have given or could have dreamt up a better response to that. Having that laser focus to make sure that the idea that there is a bias doesn't take over everything, because it can be a huge distraction. And we've seen it not just where people see a bias towards women, where people see a bias towards race. Sometimes that can overshadow what your true purpose is and what you're trying to achieve. So you've got to be focused, but you've also got to be ready to fight it. The people in this room are the change makers. If you're here, you're someone that you are interested in making a difference, and understand that change is not going to come easy to us. It's going to require fight. You fight with a smile, But you say, oh no, but this thing, we're going to do it. Yeah, that's right. It's me and you. We're in this together. So I think that's phenomenal. Let's see, we've got a couple more questions. David says, what were your personal challenges while trying to sell your idea to your investors for a piggy vest as a piggy bank? And how were you able to overcome those challenges? That's a very good one. What were your particular issues in getting investors to be like, okay, we're behind you?
Well, the first and I suppose the most obvious one was why you and why not the banks? Why won't the banks come and do what you're doing? Yes. So in that question, you find the need to identify your own unique selling point. I mean, we identified it, right? What is your unique selling point for your product, right? Why should I give you my money, right? How you make returns for me. So I will say though that after identifying the unique selling point, they still didn't give me money for 2 years when we started the business. So we had to bootstrap for about 2 years before actually raising funding. So and I'll explain. After we identified the unique selling point, the next question was, but it's Nigeria, the currency is unstable. So you have to go back to the drawing board because there's no particular solution for that, right? And then people are like, why you know, what qualifies you to do this? I also don't have an answer for that. I know that I have only just a BSc, but still, you know, this is what I want to do because I identified the problem. And so our answer to all of these questions was to show proof, right? Proof. Here's the proof. And so for 2 years, it was grinding and figuring out how to show these people traction enough so that they can then back us. So the biggest proof for anyone is your work. And again, it's hard, right? I'm again not going to tell you, it was 2 years of really hard work. I don't know how many people who know the story, but for the longest time, we weren't taking a salary. We were working side gigs to survive and still working on the company and stuff like that. So you have to first of all square up all the details on your business, right? You know, what is the unique selling point? Why should anybody give you like your business their own money to grow? You know, who is the market you're serving? Like why you versus the competition, and also traction. Who are those using your product? Like where's the proof that people want this? So that those questions you answer, and then investors will most likely give you money. Might take a while still.
I love that. Ojanyo, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. You are a phenomenal human being. I'm sure she doesn't know, I actually stalk her a little bit on social media. I started following her a while ago. But there are a lot of people here that really needed to hear what you had to say. So thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to continue the conversation. So please feel free to be in the background and contribute in the chats if you would like to. We're here for that.
All right, no problem. Thank you so much.
Taking the questions and conversations. Let's see. We've got this one that came in. It was anonymous. It says, advice for young people graduating into a market where there are no jobs. How can they then venture into tech entrepreneurship? I know that Bright also referenced this as well. Graduating, I mean, go online. There's so much information. Odoanyo herself mentioned it as well. Yeah. But any specific advice to tech and entrepreneurship, how they can venture into that?
Well, I think that first of all, tech entrepreneurship you can venture into tech entrepreneurship at any point in your life, right? But the most important thing to know is that you can't just tell yourself, I want to be an entrepreneur. You have to start from the vantage point of, I want to solve this problem. Right? Identify a pain, and then the entrepreneurship part kind of follows. Yeah.
Dope. I think that's perfect advice. Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Up next in our conversations, let's talk about the future of work. Okay, as the bottom line, how you gonna make this a goal? We have Folusho Agbaje, who's the head of human resources for Jobberman Nigeria. Hello, Folusho. How are you?
I've really enjoyed the conversation so far.
Yay, excellent. Can you turn up the volume for us a little bit because you're sounding a little bit low? Let's see if I can get that sounding better.
Is this better now?
Still a little bit hollow, but let's see if we can go ahead with that. Just project for us. We're here for this. So I'm sure you've been following the conversation. I really feel like these conversations have been even more interesting, if possible, than the last set that we had. And it's been very interesting to see where people's minds are at in terms of action, what we can do, actionable steps people can take to ensure that we are not just investing in ourselves, but in our country, because the people who are in this chat, the people that have access here, are going to be some of the most influential people in the nation, to be honest with you, in the next few years. So as regards to employment requirements, as those requirements evolve around the world and the world becomes a lot more technologically advanced, as it were, what role can business and employers play in helping to upskill and reskill the current workforce, not just from a tech standpoint, but just to prepare for the future of work? And what does that future look like?
So I think organizations have a very big role to play in upskilling their workforce to prepare for the future adequately. So I was reading a study a few days ago by PwC, and it mentioned that 74% of CEOs are actually very worried about the availability of skills in their organization right now. So organizations really need to invest in upskilling their people to keep them engaged remotely and also to survive this crisis and into the future. So businesses really need to ensure that they're focusing on development of skills for the future. And by that, I mean that rapid changes in technology are leading to some human skills becoming completely irrelevant for many organizations. So expect to see a shift away from a focus on roles and more of a focus on skills that can be used across roles, allowing organizations to be more flexible in meeting their market's needs.
Wait, sorry, pause, just go back. Let's we needed to marinate. So we're looking at a shift on focus from roles to a focus on skills. What do you mean by that?
So I think traditionally people have really concentrated on what job am I going to do at this organization, as opposed to what skills do I need to take my organization forward. So to really build an organization for the future, we need to be thinking about what gives our organization its competitive advantage and what are those skills that we need to fuel that advantage. And you can do that by doing an analysis of your current needs and also looking at what the critical skills of your organization are against what your competitors are doing. So I'll give you an example, real life. A lot of technology companies right now are looking for people with skills in natural language understanding and neural network, because they've seen that now that people are interacting a lot more with products online, we need to be understanding how to use those skills a lot more. Another example is every company is looking for people with skills in cybersecurity, because now that we're moving a lot more into the digital space, every company needs to be protected digitally. So you can't say you're training yourself on how to use Microsoft Office of 10 years ago. You actually need to be thinking into the future, like what are businesses needing and how can I bring those skills to the fore? So there are different ways that organizations can really upskill their organization to do this. The first way is through training, both traditional and informal and formal methods. The second way is by ensuring that you have a decentralized leadership team. The third way is by making sure that your culture, your organization culture, is really adaptable to change. And then the last one is to hire right. So obviously I'm here representing Joboman, and it would be remiss of me to not talk about hiring right for your organization and helping that contribute to upskilling your staff. So looking at training, there are formal ways and less formal ways to do that. The formal way, don't just think, okay, everybody who's going from this level to that level in the organization always does this training, so I'm going to let them do this training again this year. You have to think, going back to the critical skills of the future for your organization and your competitive advantage, what training do I need to do and how can I do it? And that's being creative. So not just send them to a class and they do an exam after the class. It's thinking around things like job rotations, job shadowing. If your organization has different locations geographically, you can also do secondment opportunities, because opening up your workforce into thinking outside of the box in different areas helps to really get them thinking about how to take your organization forward without just putting them in a classroom. So I guess the next two would be around decentralized leadership. So obviously different businesses have different needs and different business units within those businesses have different needs. So when your leaders are empowered enough to tell the overall organization, this is what we need and this is the individual approach I want to take for my unit, it's a lot more effective. And then my last point around upskilling is, obviously, you can't drive a culture that has adaptation, like adaptability to change, without ensuring that everybody that you hire is fitting into that culture. So let's move away from using the term culture fit and looking at the term culture add. If you're looking into the future and thinking, for example, that I need people who are innovative, you shouldn't be hiring somebody who's not innovative. And how do you objectively test for that? You can do assessments. So JobOne actually has a skills assessment that we do with every listing if you would like to do that as a client. And what that does is that it objectively tests the critical skills that you've identified for your organization. So in summary, it's really about being futuristic in your thoughts as an organization, identifying the critical needs, and then training and taking the right steps in terms of hiring and building the right culture to make sure that you're really upskilling your workforce that way.
All right, I love that. Thank you very much for that, Felicia. But I'm also going to ask about, from the other end, because we've looked at the organizations and making sure that they're aware of what is important. But then what are for people that are working within these organizations that are going to job amend and they're trying to there's this internal focus of, which job can I need which job can I get? And you get in there, and as we've heard from previous speakers, people have been made redundant. When things like COVID-19 happens, there's all sorts of things that will happen through time that will cause employers or people who are employing labor to say, wait, I've got to look at my business now and figure out who I don't need and get rid of those. So how can people who are employees themselves make sure that they are upskilling for themselves and making sure that they stay relevant so that when these redundancies do happen, which they do inevitably, they are not caught out in that?
So I think to your point, there was something Oduayo mentioned that I really liked, and that was around self-awareness. So as an employee, you need to be self-aware around your strengths and your weaknesses. Bright also mentioned that there are about 926 trade areas that Nigerians don't do at all. So everybody thinks I'm on this path and I must be doing this path. I'm not going to think outside of the box. You have to make sure that as an employee, you're really being self-aware enough to tap into those areas, not the traditional areas only, but also thinking about how you as yourself, what are your strengths and your weaknesses, and how can you improve yourself. So self-development is something that's very important. I know most millennials take it very seriously, which is great. There's so many free resources online, and you can make sure that you're constantly upskilling yourself in the areas that you want to build your strengths in, and not just things that you think everybody is doing. And that way you will always be relevant to not just your organization, but your brand, because you never want to be tied to an organization. I'll talk about this more later if I have the chance, but no millennial stays in a job for longer than 5 years these days. 5 years is considered a long time. So you don't want to be thinking of yourself as the brand, right? You want to be thinking, okay, what are the critical skills of the future, and what line of skills do I want to be acquiring?
All right. I love that. Okay. So as we're talking about the future now and looking how we're going to move forward, within the next 10 years, the workforce will comprise almost entirely of millennials and Generation Z generations that thrive on getting things done sharp, fast. Test is what they're looking for. But how would you say that this will affect our productivity? So will we be more productive? The value of work? Will speed impact the quality of what's being delivered? And engagement with an older generation of employees who will most likely be required to might be in management and even some leadership, or currently a lot of leadership positions. How will that work?
So anytime I get asked questions about millennials, I always laugh because, being a millennial myself, it's quite interesting because people are like, oh, millennials, they talk about us like we're this alien.
It's a different... And I keep saying that, everyone, please, millennial is from 1981 all the way down to here.
Exactly.
He's long, one many. Some of us are in the elder bracket, but it is us. Now we.
Exactly. It's a very big group. So I guess the way I want to answer this question, I'm going to try and unpack it, because while we are one demographic of millennials, and I guess Gen Z as well, who are quite different from millennials, might I add, we have some common characteristics, and you mentioned the speed. So I guess other common characteristics would be all millennials are tech savvy. Most of us grew up in the digital age. As I mentioned before, we're all job hoppers. So most people stay in a job between 2 to 3 years on average. We're extremely curious people. So no millennial is going to do any job in your organization without asking, why am I doing this? And if you have a millennial working for you that's not asking that question, then you should be worried. We're generally accepting of various cultures, sexual orientations, religion. We're a very accepting group of people. And we really value work-life balance and quality of life. So most millennials will tell you that they want to be in a job where they're happy and they have time to do what they want to do, and that they want to do it at their own pace. And they don't want you to squeeze them into a box of, you have to do it in this hour, at this pace, in this location. Yeah. And then lastly, I would say that we all want to change the world. And I think that's speed, transcends all those common characteristics. Having said that though, millennials and Gen Z employees, we're unique in the sense that we want a very individualistic approach to how we are managed.
Okay.
To unpack that, mentioning the speed of how we do things, I would say that the impact on productivity is, first of all, we process information very quickly. Very, very, very quickly. Sorry, I just saw a comment. So I just want to see if, please really, okay, yeah. I thought it was a question for me.
Yes,
we process information very quickly, and that means that when we're utilized well and when we're managed well, you're going to see quick results. It's not going to take forever to get the work done. And then secondly, we focus on outcomes, not processes. And what that means is that we're looking at how can we deliver quality work in the time that we've said we want to do it. So for example, at Jobberman, most of our organization is millennial. And most people will tell you that they want the flexibility. So we have flexible hours. Some people work 7:30 to 3:30, some people work 9 to 5, some people do 8 to 4 to fit their needs, because we're focusing on the outcomes, not the processes of the work. And then I guess lastly, being highly curious, it means that we are more likely to be innovative in our problem solving. So if there's a problem to solve, we're going to find the best ways to do it. And we're going to look online and we're going to do all the research to get to that answer. Having said that though, not all, I'm talking like millennials are this perfect group of—
I was gonna say, because this sounds perfect. I don't know why we get such bad flack and why the government keeps talking down about young people, because this sounds great.
When we're so curious and we're so smart and we're so innovative. So having said that, to get the best out of your millennial population and to get them as productive as possible, you need to have an individualistic approach to managing them, which is where the management part of your question comes in. Like, how do we manage them in such a way that we're benefiting from that speed? So as I mentioned, in Jobberman, we're mostly millennials. So a framework that I use in kind of managing the human resources at Jobberman is a framework called the CAN framework, C-A-N. And what that stands for is care, automate, and enable. So I'll touch on that briefly, just so that everybody has a practical way of how to implement the framework. The first one is care in CAN. Millennials want to feel cared for. And as I mentioned, we're all different. We might have those common characteristics I mentioned, but everybody wants to feel heard in their organization and everybody wants to feel cared for. So what does that mean? First thing is spontaneous feedback. Don't wait till my performance appraisal to tell me that I did a good job. I want to hear it now. I want to hear it fast. I want to hear it today. And for some millennials, for extroverts, they want it to be told to the company immediately and they want to get the praise. So that's where things like Slack, applications like Slack and having a praise wall really come into play, where you can immediately say, you're a rock star, thank you, you did such a great job. And even things like your benefits package. So this transcends the traditional salaries and HMO. Not just the salaries, right? Obviously people want to make money, but it's a lot more than that. It's also about flexible working and how do I ensure that my HMOs work for my millennials? So a lot of millennials are very, very, very particular about mental health, which is great because we're talking about it a lot more than previous generations did. And it's something that really affects people in the workplace. So does your benefits package outline any kind of provision for mental health? Do you have a list of hospital facilities that really help you to outline what you can do in terms of mental health? So that's care. The second thing is automate. The second part of the framework is automate. And by automation, it really means that you're using your digital tools to ensure that your work processes are done seamlessly through forward planning and execution. So there was a study by McKinsey that I was reading a few days ago, and it mentioned that in about 60% of occupations, at least 1/3 of the activities could be automated. So that implies that there's so much productivity that we can get when we do the automation. In the practical sense, I'll give an example that's probably one of my favorite examples as an HR professional, which is agile performance management. Gone are the days of getting long sheets and writing out, this person was good, I'm going to give them a 5 rating. You need, for millennials, you need something that's fast and you need something that's easy to use, which is why HR systems like Lattice or 15Five or Leapsome, to name a few of my favorite ones, are really good in terms of providing that spontaneous and automated feedback. Because I, as a millennial, do not want to be having to remember when my performance appraisal is coming up. I want to have calendar reminders that pop up and tell me, go and fill in your goals, It's time to track your goals. You've filled in your goals 80%. You still have 20% to do. You need to do this review, your team manager. And I really think having those components in place really works. The last part of the framework is the N, which is enable. Enable means that you're empowering not just your management team, but also your whole organization to be able to put in their best. So this is where I mentioned the decentralized leadership styles. And your leaders need to be empowered enough to say, this person on my team likes to work flexibly, so I'm going to let them work all night if they want and then take the day off tomorrow. Likewise, your employees need to be empowered enough to know what works best for them and be able to put their hand up and ask for it. So you need to have an organization that has that hybrid model where both the managers and the employees are empowered enough to say what works for them in the best way to get the best productivity gains. So in summary, the answer to your question is yes. I think the speed of the way millennials work is going to be really great in terms of productivity gains going into the future of work, but it needs to be managed very carefully together.
Okay, let me go over to questions. There are questions coming through in their comments as well. We've got this one from Ejiro who says, what do you think about people leaving 9-to-5 careers to become entrepreneurs as opposed to seeking leadership positions within, set companies and actually gaining leadership skills? Because there is this huge push to entrepreneurship where everyone thinks that's the end goal for them. Like, oh, you have to own your own business. If you don't own your business, it doesn't make sense. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good question, because I think for a lot of millennials and Gen Z as well, because Gen Z has been shown to be very entrepreneurial, there's this conception that if you're not doing your own thing, you haven't started your side hustle, what's your business? You don't own a business, are you really doing anything? But I think you have to strike the balance, right? So know yourself and know what your strengths are and know whether or not you have a niche in the market. So I'll explain that. If you feel like you still have some room to learn and you can see role models in the organization that you're working in that you want to emulate and learn more from them, maybe have mentoring opportunities, then stay in that organization and learn from them. However, if you really feel like you found your niche in the market, you've thought about it very well, you've done your research, and you think you're ready to go out and try to be an entrepreneur, then do it. You might as well. People don't become entrepreneurs a lot of the time because they're scared of failure. But there's nothing wrong with making mistakes and learning from them. So I guess, Adrian, my answer would be, with a lot of thoughts, you would have to assess the situation on a case-by-case basis, but really be self-aware and ask yourself the hard questions about whether or not that decision is the right one for you at that point in time.
Yeah, I like that. We've got this one in. Kende makes a comment. He just says, the company should be thinking more in terms of activities, not just function. I guess this will reduce the interfunctional silos. So someone could actually do more than just holding a position or post, essentially. Great, thanks for this, he says. And Stephanie says, I feel like this statistic about no millennials staying in an organization for longer than 5 years can sometimes make people feel like they should be job hoppers. But, how can you build your skills as well as grow with a brand or organization? I think that's a phenomenal question, Stephanie. Thank you for that, and a great comment as well.
That's a good one. I really like it. So something else I want to add is, these are stereotypes of millennials. It doesn't mean that that's the story for everybody. And that's why I keep drumming on about that individualistic approach to managing millennials. So that's the general statistic of most millennials. Most millennials don't stay in a job longer than 5 years. However, you do have some millennials. And I would even say, like, if I look at my husband probably displays more Gen X characteristics than millennial characteristics, that he is actually a millennial. So it goes back to having that self-awareness to know about yourself. Is this a time to leave the job I'm in? You have to ask yourself that question. Do I feel like I'm still growing? Is there room to grow in this organization? Are there skills that I can still acquire that I can see here? Is it a case of doing my job and doing extra skills and training and self-development on my own to really grow? Or do I have to leave? So there's nothing that says you have to leave. There's nothing wrong with staying in a job longer than 5 years. In fact, I think it shows that it says a lot of good things about you if you do stay in a job longer than 5 years. But that's a great question.
Dope. Okay, we've got this one. Anonymous attendee says, Felicia, what do you think about all the people moving to Canada? It's quite tempting. That is definitely something I wanted to round up with, because, we've talked about all these different things, opportunities, fight, challenge. Some people are just tired and they're like, you know what? The grass is looking a little bit greener over where the maple leaves are. So, I mean, what
I
are your
see
thoughts on that?
Oh, Canada. Literally, that explains my thoughts because, yeah, it's a tough one. That's a really good question because I guess as a young millennial or Gen Z, you're looking at the opportunities and you're thinking, I could grow my skills if I just moved to Canada. I have this friend who moved to Canada and they're doing this job. I do want to say though that Canada is not the promised land because you hear of so many people that have, I mean, no pun intended, but you hear of so many people that have left Nigeria for Canada and they're looking for jobs for 2 years, 3 years. They've got PhDs and they're working as cleaners. There's nothing wrong with working as a cleaner, but that's not what they moved to Canada to do. So I think something that Bright mentioned on his session when he was talking was that it's not that there are no jobs in Nigeria. There are jobs, they're just jobs that people don't want to do. So before you move to Canada, ask yourself the question, can I do that job? Is it a skill that I can acquire? Oduayo mentioned that somewhere like technology, the barriers are almost non-existent. You can learn a new skill that can find you a job in the technology sector. Maybe you grew up thinking you were going to be a doctor and now you're like, this medicine isn't happening in Lagos, so maybe I should move to Canada. Actually, ask yourself the question before you start doing your immigration papers and think about this. Maybe I can do a job with technology. There's digital transformation. Michael mentioned that we're in the middle of a huge digital revolution. Is there somewhere in the digital sector that I can work in where I can apply my skills that actually I thought were fits for the medical sector, but actually fits for technology and grow my skills in that area and find a job in Nigeria without having to move to Canada? So I know Nigeria is not perfect. This is not an ad for the government to stay in Nigeria, but before you move to Canada, it is not the promised land. Think about all your options in Nigeria first.
Yeah, I think it is just the very real reality that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and that whatever challenges you think you're escaping on one end, you're still going to find challenges elsewhere. So the question is to really challenge yourself to see, okay, what are the opportunities and what are the problems that I can really solve, where somebody can pay me even more, or I can earn higher, or perhaps even export my skill set using technology globally, so that, yeah, I can earn Forex and that way bring something into the community without leaving and taking everything outside. Because the problem with leaving is that you remove yourself from being a part of the solutions on the ground. And if we say that change starts with us and we really do want to see a better country, you know, we have to do the work.
Exactly.
We've got this one in from Kende Peters. I know we've pretty much come to the end of our session with you, but let's just take this one where he says, what about the approach of a shadow board to managing millennials? Shadow board simply blending us with baby boomers to learn how to approach work. Do you think that we really need that for the future of work? Because baby boomers believe that we need to learn something from them, like character. Interesting.
Okay.
Thanks.
So by shadow boards, do you mean job shadowing?
This is a good question. Okay, Peter, if you could clarify what you mean by shadow board, that would be great.
For the benefits of the audience, I'm going to assume that by shadow boards, you mean job shadowing. And I would say, I mean, to answer your question, right, to really benefit from learning from Gen X, there's so much to learn from them. In fact, I love talking to not just Gen X, like the previous generations as well. I love talking to my grandparents. I love talking to my parents. In fact, when I have a question for work, my go-to person is my mom. And I think there's a lot to learn from the previous generations about character, patience, especially patience, because we're not a very patient group of people, us millennials. And there's a lot to learn in the context of work, in terms of building your skills in an area, keeping an open mind, not always jumping to conclusions before you really fully understand the situation. So I think there is definitely room for job shadowing. I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about upskilling your organization, as job shadowing being an option for work. If you're lucky enough to work in an organization that has people that have been there for 20 years, before I moved to Dublin, I used to work at KPMG, and some of the partners have been there their whole careers. And talking to them is like literally drinking from a wealth of knowledge. And I think definitely there's room for job shadowing. If you can achieve that or find a mentor who's not in your organization, if you have a young organization that doesn't have older people, then find an external mentor and see if you can do some job shadowing in that way.
Okay. We have some of the Canada references showing up here. Someone says, I think young people are escaping poverty. They're not just migrating to Canada. Do you think that that move is an escape of poverty?
That one's a tough one because, yeah, it's a tough one. I think overall, Canada has a really good standard of quality of living. So healthcare is really good. You can also maybe get a job that's doesn't pay so well, but you can still have access to basic amenities that you might not have access to in Nigeria. So that's a tough one. I mean, Nigeria is hard. Let's call it speed. It's hard to live with. You have to be very driven to make sure that it works for you. So I can't judge anybody for moving to Canada. I would just say think well about it before you move.
I love that. Okay, and just a final question, just from me to you, and then we'll round this up. Even though we can't predict all the changes that will occur in the future from trends, we do know that millennials will get the opportunity to do work that demands more creativity, imagination, social and emotional intelligence, as well as passion. And according to Forbes, employees will need to shape their own career path. As gone are the days when your career trajectory was outlined by a company with predictable steps, you know exactly where you're going, the corporate ladder is clear. Now it's all over the place. So what are the learning approaches and core skills that millennials need to ensure that they are thriving in this future that's approaching, that's here, really, that's here?
Okay, so I think probably the core skills for the future of work would be soft skills. And you already mentioned some of them being emotional intelligence and time management. So for the benefits of the audience, soft skills are non-technical skills. Then they're not, you can't really hold on to them or put your finger on them, but they're actually quite integral in terms of your business and how behaviors flow in your business and how you're really taking your business forward. So examples are things like time management, flexibility, adaptability to change, communication, teamwork. I would say my top 3 soft skills for the future of work would be communication, adaptability to change, and teamwork. So communication, not just verbal communication, but also business writing, being able to write emails as we're moving to a very digital stage in work, being able to write emails well. Nigerians, please, 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 please. I could go on a whole session on email etiquette here, but I'll leave it as that. We need to understand how to communicate well, not just verbally, but the digital space. Secondly, it would be adaptability and flexibility. The only constant of the future of work is change. I know that sounds cliche, but that's the only thing that we can predict about the future of work. There's going to be a lot of change. And we're going to need to pick up our millennial speed skills to make sure that we're adapting to that change as it's coming. So I'll give you an example. In Joburg, we have the sales team that would typically go to the client's office. During the lockdown, initially it was like, what do? We can't go to the client's office. But immediately they started calling. They all turned into telesales agents immediately because they had to learn how to make those sales on the phone. So that adaptability is key. You need to be picking things up immediately they're happening and adapting immediately. And then the last soft skill that I would say is quite important is teamwork. And this is teamwork not just within your organization, but also across organizations and across functions within your organization, and being able to know how to collaborate to take your business forward. So I'll give you an example. Apple and Google just created a coronavirus tracking tool. And that was in the middle of the pandemic. Obviously, they would have had to be working quite closely together in one of the most difficult times the world has faced to create a tool that was beneficial to the world. So many organizations are going to need to ensure that they have those soft skills in place and that they're upskilling their employees to be able to make sure that they're taking their business forward. So a lot of you will be wondering, how do I develop these soft skills? But luckily for you, Jobberman is running a free soft skills training, and it's completely free. It's online. Many of you might have heard about this already. All you have to do is go on Jobberman's website to the youth engagement section, and you can sign up there. And it covers topics like the ones I've just spoken about and more. So self-awareness, time management, teamwork, communication, etc. So develop yourselves. Be prepared for the future, because we don't know what's coming.
Odisha, thank you so much for your time, for the knowledge that you've shared with us. Truly appreciate you. And thank you to everyone that's contributed as well. I think we're officially done with your session. Thank you so much. To everybody, all our speakers, all our panelists, you guys have been absolutely phenomenal. This has been a very interesting, a very engaging, a very thought-provoking session here. And it is still the early stages of even more conversations. Oando have been fantastic enough to recognize the need for this sort of discussion, this sort of access to millennials that are doing things and creating a table for us to sit around. And I'm very thankful to Oando for doing that. And so don't forget, for those of you who have been logged on here on Zoom, this is also streaming on YouTube. So when this session is done, you can go to YouTube, you can catch replay, you can watch it again. You can share it with people, because I think there's a lot of information and insight that has been present here that people out there in the world could really use, and a lot of millennials could use. Don't forget, of course, in the meantime, to use the hashtag Owando webinar series. There's a lot of this that would have been shared on social media, on the different platforms, so that you can continue the conversation online. Do remember that on Twitter, we are at Owando_PLC, on Instagram as well, same thing. It is at Owando PLC on Twitter, at Owando PLC, LinkedIn, YouTube, of course, the website, owandoplc.com as well. Please go over there. And there's something very important that I really want to mention to everyone to pay attention to, if you just give me a second. You know, when you have all your notes all over the place, because it's been such a phenomenal conversation. But this is very, very important. Since we are talking about investing in the community and investing in one another, I have to say that, you know, this is a long-standing pandemic that has been happening, all right? COVID-19 in Nigeria has been affecting everyone, but even before that, we've had the hunger pandemic. We have over 87 million Nigerians that live in extreme poverty, and approximately 50% of our population cannot even afford to eat. And despite the best efforts of NGOs and charities to provide palliatives to those in need, there is still that huge gap that exists between those in dire need and those that are eventually reached and fed. And so to that end, the humans of Owando created TAP. It is an aggregator platform to support charities in bridging this gap. Essentially, the objective of TAP is to amplify the charities' reach and community at this time, to bridge the gap between the fed and unfed. So Owando have partnered with over 10 charities. They've reached about 4,463 families across 19 communities in the first 90 days, with their goal being zero hunger. So if you want to get involved, please go to Tap to Reach All. That is tap to reachall.org. That's very important, because think about it. If a meal costs 350 naira, yet half of our population cannot afford to eat, we all have a role to play in ensuring that all Nigerians can eat and eat well. So please do go get engaged in that. I know that Owando will share even more information. Again, that website is www.taptoreachall.org. Okay, taptoreachall.org. And on that note, we have officially come to the end of this session. It has been phenomenal. Don't forget, again, it's on all of the platforms, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, under PLC. I believe that there might also be a survey post-event, so please make sure that you complete that survey post-event. That would be great. And on behalf of Under PLC, I want to thank the guests for joining the conversation. I want to thank you all for joining the conversation. And remember that change starts with us. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but it is absolutely necessary, because last, this is our country. However you look at it, whichever way you cut it, can't change that. So thank you guys. I've had a beautiful, beautiful session. I'm going to sign out now, and I'll catch you guys at the next set of Millennial Conversations. I'm Folu Storms. Have a good day now.